Hello, many thanks for your kind invitation. I try to be so synthetic. Let me say that I'm a constitutional law lecturer, but during my professional career, I work at the Data Protection Spanish Agency. I have been working on different conditions in order to assess university and research in university environments. And I collaborate a lot and in different situations regarding the developing of data analytics of app mobile applications and so on. Then I'm swearing different hats depending on the situation. What we have learned and in fact, part of my research has been to design how to process data in healthcare environments for research from GDPR to national laws. This experience comes in a previous moment from the European Health Data Space Regulation that, in my opinion, it's a really challenging law that probably must be adapted to different research needs during the proceeding. Let me say that our main difficulties in past in projects like big Medelytics regards about how to process anonymized data. And let me say that the conclusion, it's so convenient for the idea of the project. This is not only about the implementation of anonymization technique. Let me share with online a recently published article by MIT News. They conclude that there are no risks of re-identification if you complete your HART or a properly anonymization with additional guarantees regarding the environment. We are talking about security, we are talking about traceability, we are talking about registering, and we are talking about legal binding agreements. That's the solution that we implemented in Big Medelytics, that we are experimented in a Chameleon project, and the only way to provide intermediation services under Data Governance Act. It means, remember that we have to deal with a non-homogeneous regulatory landscape. If you remember, EHDS bets on anonymization, but it is possible to ask to the the organism with capability to authorize the access to data, the data access body, if you need to process pseudonymized data. But in this case, in my opinion, national laws applies. If you are working in Spain, national laws has been designed in order to permit to process pseudonymized data in a securized environment without any consent. But this is not the case of other countries. Then it is really relevant to define a general environment for processing data in healthcare research in this new regulation, because if we will come back to the general rules of GDPR, we will have the same problems. In fact, the way to solve this kind of problems have been to apply any kind of intermediation software in federated data spaces. We are talking about differential privacy, multi-party computation, and other tools, synthetic data, in order to provide the certainty that the ones who are processing data can't identify anyone. And really, this is so difficult to be implemented. But let me say that we need an additional layer of legal governance if we are operating as intermediation services as a cloud health research infrastructure. In this case, I think we have to differentiate between European Health Data Space, direct provision of services, or Data Governance Act. The reason is that in European health data space, you could probably will required by the data access body in order to proportionate data. But in addition, you could be giving access to data users in your environment. To do that, in my opinion, you need a governance. You need to have permission proceedings. You need to have terms and conditions for data access users. You need to have a registering form and a registering procedure. And probably you need to nominate a data access committee, because we have to deal with ethics and legal compliance at 3 levels. We have to add to the traditional biomedical ethics, those who are the task of ethical committees, the AI ethics, the risk analysis that must be implemented in case of data analytics. This is not probably today compulsory under law, but is strongly recommended in the last initiatives of the European Commission regarding healthcare research, and in my opinion, it will be compulsory under the new artificial intelligence regulation. Let me remember that this is a law based on risk analysis that qualifies any AI system considering the risks. And those systems that will process sensitive data will be considered for sure a high risk AI systems. It means that in terms of legal obligations and ethical obligations, the DPIA, the data protection impact assessment, the privacy by design tool, the audit of different controls you have to apply to AI in data protection, the risk analysis on anonymization, and finally, the risk analysis on how to proceed with the processing with AI tools will be so relevant. Let me give you a non-biomedical example. We are working in a project that processes data for small and medium enterprises. And there is a challenge regarding the recognition of fruit images in order to take decisions of commercializations. No personal data, no problems with GDPR. But if the system fails, the competence will have a problem, because there will be anybody taking decisions about distribution and causing harms to the farmers or to the market. And we have a risk analysis here on AI. If we are talking about medical devices, we are talking about inferences relevant for medical decisions and so on, it's clear that the ethical on AI requirements must be compulsory. Finally, you have to verify the legal compliance. Then remember, I underlined that anonymization, securized environment and trustable environment, and governance, in my opinion, must be compulsory. But there is a new and a fourth requirement really relevant: data altruism. Let me say that in my experience, the patients give us permission when they are ill. Usually you said, okay, Mr. Martinez, you have the ill of Mr. Martinez. Could you collaborate in our research? From the point of view of data protection consent, we are accessing, or we are achieving consent in an asymmetric situation. But if we want to promote data altruism, we have to consider any patient in any situation during a long period of time. It means that we have to promote pilots in order to verify how to obtain consent in a freely and unambiguous situation. And this means that probably we have to design strategies with different steps in order to inform, to confirm the information, and to giving consent. And let me share with you one lesson learned from the primary uses on European Health Data Space Regulation. They said, we will to empower the patient. We will to give them access and control over their data. In terms of data altruism for research activities, it must be the same. This is not only about an informed consent form. It's about the way we will be in touch constantly with the patient in order to inform him or her about the results, the use of their data, to confirm consents, to have a different report with them. And to finalize, with consent, we have an additional problem. Here in Spain, we regulate a wider concept of consent. Then here in Spain, you could consent for an area of research, not for a specific research or for a concrete or for a specific research of the project of a team. This is not the same in all over the countries, and this is not the approach of the data protection authorities. Then this must be clarified in the regulation in order to promote certainty to all of the research team in Europe. Because if we are betting on data altruism, we have to provide certainty and legal security. And that's all I want to share with you this morning.
Thank you very much, Ricard. So we have our initial question by Marialuisa.
Thank you, Salva. Thank you, Ricardo, for this very interesting talk. I have a question for you. You said that anonymization should be, the choice should be compulsory. But then you said that for the informed consent, we need to go back to the patient for a long period of time. Now, with anonymization, the patient cannot exercise the right of withdrawal consent, of returning of results, of returning of the incidental findings. So how you can manage with this? I think that pseudonymization is also good not only for researchers, of course, because to follow up with the patient, but also for the patient themselves.
They will be completely agree. Let me differentiate between 2 or 3 scenarios. In case of anonymization, we have to deal with the different guidelines of national data protection authorities. We have to deal with the opinion 5 from 2014 of the Working Party Article 29. Just right now, we talked the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board. And let me say that they said in this opinion that to anonymize is really impossible. This is the conclusion of the opinion. You have to apply different strategies of anonymization. You have to guarantee not only the conditions of your anonymization, but the future in terms of next technologies, in terms of risk from anybody all over the world. Then this is really impossible to be achieved in practice. But you have to add that I remember that ICO, Information Commissioner of UK, have a guidelines. GNIL in France have a guidelines. Everybody in the data protection agencies in Germany have a common guide, and in Spain we have our guide, and we recently republished the Singapore guide with a tool in order to anonymize. Then this is a very difficult effort. If you are processing data with consent in an anonymized way, the only information you could report to the patient regards the use of the dataset. In that case, you are not reporting him or her nothing about the data processing, nothing about the results. You only have to mark the dataset in order to send him or her information regarding, okay, we are so grateful the dataset that contains your data has been used in order to research cancer, blah, blah, blah. This is the only information you could have because you can't identify anybody in the dataset. The second possibility is pseudonymization. This is the choice of Spanish legislation due to the fact you said, if I use a pseudonymized data in a controlled environment, the final purpose of the law to protect patient data can be achieved. But I will have additional benefits. First of all, the data set will be complete without any erasing, without any generalization, without any difficulty in order to process data. And second, in case of incidental finding, Spanish national law specifically states that the fact will be notified to those who have the identifier in order to protect the patient. There is a very really good combination. Let me say that in the Spanish case, it means that, okay, researchers and dataset, researchers cannot have access to any identifier. Second, the dataset is in a securized environment with a data protection impactment, with adequate security measures, with traceability, and so on. Third, it must be approved by the ethical committee. And fourth, there is compulsory to have binding agreements with the compromises of the researchers on non-re-identification. I think it's a really good solution, but this is not the solution of the EHDS proposal. This is not the solution of the GDPR. This is not the solution of a lot of national laws. But remember that if you read the recitals in the European Health Data Space proposal, they said, first choice, anonymization, but we have to recognize that under certain conditions, it's really difficult to work with anonymized data. In my opinion, it will be more usual than probably the lawmakers thought.
And what about anonymize the metadata? Yeah.
Let me say that this is a really relevant concern in the case of a Chameleon project, because we are dealing with cancer images, and we are identifying what metadata could re-identify the patient. This is not only about the content of the image, of the radiography, this is about the content of the metadata and the additional data that enrich the database. This is a really, really strong work to be implemented. And we are, just right now, we are discussing these days about our methodology, its correction, and implementing a risk analysis in order to be sure that all of identifiers have been erased. Let me say that this means that we are applying 2 layers of anonymization. Usually, in hospital environments, they are talking about anonymization when they really are talking about the identification. In all of my projects, when you receive the database from the hospital, we have implemented a second layer of anonymization. We need to be sure that data has been duly anonymized. If not, you could be in a hurry. It's really relevant to do that, and you are completely right. You have to consider metadata as part of your work.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a question from the audience.
Hello, my name is Mihaela Matei. I work for ECRIN. I would like to go back to Marialuisa's question, the previous one. I think, Marialuisa, correct me if I'm wrong, you just raised an ethical question, not a legal question. Because in case of anonymization, assuming that we can anonymize the data, we don't fall under the GDPR anymore. But the question is, do we choose this solution, meaning anonymization, considering that in case of anonymization, we cannot go to the patient, back to the patients anymore. We cannot inform them about incidental findings, and people cannot withdraw anymore. So I think it's not a legal solution, but I would say that's a ethical position or ethical perspective and choice that should be made by the data controller and then by the researcher as well. It depends on should we anonymize or not the data. So this is the question. So I understand that anonymization might solve many legal issues, but the question is how do we address the ethical issues in case we cannot go back to patients to inform them about the incidental findings.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, but this is not only an ethical issue, this is a legal issue too. Let me say that, in my opinion, we had, especially during COVID, a problem with privacy experts, with privacy champions, and with data protection authorities. Let me say that when I teach constitutional law at my university, there is an article in Spain regarding to right of everybody to life. This is a constitutional right. In fact, if you are not alive, if you are dead, you have no rights. This is so simply to be understood. And in every constitution, in the European Charter of Human Rights or Fundamental Rights, this is so clear. And we are promoting quality of life, recovery, and in this case of research activity, we are helping the healthcare system in order to provide healthcare services. Then this is not only a legal issue, excuse me, an ethical issue. If we are talking about life, we are talking about illness, if we are talking about vulnerable persons that are suffering, in my opinion, there is no choice. We have to re-identify, we have to promote the recovery of the patient, or we have to prevent any incidental damage. And if we talk only with data protection authority about that, it seems so stupid, but I absolutely confused because I think that they have not understood this. It's really sad to say to anybody, I am so sorry, your wife is dead, but we granted her data protection right till the end. This is stupid. This is not, this is ethically unbelievable. That's the reason I thought and I said that we have to change our approach and we have to learn, for example, from Spanish regulation in order to promote this kind of identification, this kind of uses where it will be needed.
Can I answer this? Yeah.
Yeah, very shortly.
Yeah, it's very short. So I fully agree with you. Actually, from a legal perspective, my issue was during the COVID pandemic is the fact that there is no specific legal provision or legal framework for this type of situation. So, for instance, in France, so as you nicely explained, so we have to take into account several legal layers. One of them is in relation to the GDPR, but there is another one that we are applying in the context of clinical research, is the qualification of health research protocol. So we can fall under the clinical trial regulation or under other type of regulations depending on the national system. So the problem with the research on COVID is that we didn't have a framework or a specific category of research that allows us to perform rapidly this type of clinical trials or research, health-related research, because it's not always a clinical trial. So, for instance, in France, in order to qualify this type of research, we have to use the provisions applicable to emergency research situation, which is not always the case because some of the patients in the context of COVID were able to give consent. So yeah, so legally speaking, one of the issues that we have, and maybe it's also in relation to the GDPR, is the fact that there are no specific provisions for research in the context of pandemics. So this is
let me give you an example. In Spain, our health public system processed a lot of anonymous data, but we have a specific provision that permits to process personal data without any consent for public health purposes during a pandemic situation. This is expressly stated by public opinion, data protection agencies' positions, and so on, in practice, affect the decisions of the healthcare public system. This is not correct. We are not in a correct way. And let me say, in addition, other issue. If you remember, the European Data Protection Board said that there were no possibility to process telephone numbers in order to communicate with patients, in order to obtain geolocation of patients. Then, I remember in April 2020, I was traveling in a bus in my city with 70 persons that I never met or known with a positive COVID disease. How could I share with the person who are making a contact tracing about the people I'm contacted with? This is impossible, but the telephone company needs only 1 minute to do that. And this data have been sent, if possible, directly to the health record of the patient. And in this case, the practitioner could talk directly with vulnerable persons in order to prevent and to help them. But this was forbidden by GDPR and by the European Data Protection Authority. And let me be really clear. They killed persons. I know that this is so rigorous, but in my opinion, this was the result.
Oh, so I would like to finalize your intervention, Ricard, with a more positive tone. So I will come back later, if possible, about data altruism. But by now, thank you very much for the intervention. It has been super interesting, and it's a pity you are not here with us, because probably coffee would have been great to keep this.
Juan, let me add only one thing. I'm so contundent because I need to transmit to the authorities the real needs of researchers. I think, like me and my colleagues of the panel, understand that we are working for a common good, that we are working for research. We are not the ones who decide, we are ones who are serving and promoting the common good of our societies. Then we need to impulse the knowledge of the data of the lawmakers in order to understand how to conceive, how to balance privacy rights and research activities. And this is possible if you have an open mind. But to have an open mind, you need to know the consequences. You need to know that there will be people who could be suffering or who could be dying. And I need to be clear with that. This is, I hate really this negative approach, but it's really relevant to communicate this fact. We are working for patient, for a vulnerable and suffering person. And in my approach to data, data protection will serve human beings and not the contrary.
Fully agree with your views, and I wouldn't say negative. I will say realistic. And with that tone, I would like to invite Marialuisa to the stage for her presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure to be with you, and especially today to talk about these very interesting issues. So my talk will be just to setting the scene. I will talk about the science in transition and the open science and EOSC that are European priorities. But really, Salva asked me to talk about challenges to systematically use health-related data for research and what opportunities we have at the moment to solve these challenges and what EOSC can do. So, European priorities. Science is in transition. The open science paradigm affects the whole research cycle and all its stakeholders, and implies the knowledge to sharing knowledge and tools as early as possible, as openly as possible, as restricted as necessary, as we say always, as fair as possible, developing and enabling policies. Now, the open science is a political priority for Union, and the member states' commitment for the ERA action clearly identified either the open science and EOSC and research infrastructure as a priority. And we have to take this in mind. So now, going to the challenges. Challenges. Several challenges are already been discussed. The challenges are related to data, are related to the management of data, and the access to data, to infrastructure, and to policies. So the first challenge is about interoperability of health-related data. There is actually the need of set of standards and guidelines to support interoperability. And really, we are not there yet. Then we already discussed about the balance between the application of the FAIR principles, so to access data, to have data accessible and reusable, findable, accessible and reusable, to balance this with the protection of privacy and promoting the safe use of citizens' health data. So now we discussed already this. Then infrastructure. There is the need to develop a technical computational infrastructure that needs to be certified and also GDPR compatible. Another topic is the security, already discussed, so a lot have been discussed already. The health data processed and stored in secure system need to have a security management system. And this is the condition to have the trust of the patient and the citizens. About legal guidance, we really need a legal guidance. We need to have harmonized legal basis for access and use of data. We discussed already this. The GDPR, I mean, have a fragmented interpretation across Europe. I think that there is the need for clarity about this, and also I think that we don't need another regulation. We need to clarify the regulation that is already in place. Very important is training for actual and new generation of data managers and also of clinicians. We need to learn how to manage data and how to make fair by design the data from, the health system. And the last actually comment, we discussed about artificial intelligence. I want to point out that artificial intelligence can raise ethical concern, discrimination, because, very often the data set, do not include data, that includes gender and minorities and so on. And so this type of are underrepresented usually in the data set. And therefore, since artificial intelligence needs to be trained, for doing artificial intelligence, there is the need to train the data set. So there could be, the risk of really a discrimination. And we need to discuss about this. Now, what opportunities we have at the moment to address those challenges and what EOSC elements can be utilized. What is EOSC? We all know what is EOSC. It's a web of scientific insights, web of fair data and related services. So everything is in EOSC apparently. Federation of relevant existing and future data sources. Federation of the e-infra and research infrastructure. Is a virtual space where science producers and consumers come together, is the environment in which data can be brought together with services to perform analysis and address societal challenges. Now, EOSC, can be seen as a cross-cutting data infrastructure focused on research and innovation that intersect all sectorial data spaces. And the development of the European health data space should avoid the data guidelines and management of health fair data, I'm reading, may grow, because this was, agreed, may grow apart with the risk of lessening the impact on research and overall European data strategy. So this is very important. We really don't need to reinvent the wheel, as Salva said at the beginning. And the existence of EOSC initiatives should be pointed out in all sectoral data space initiatives, in their regulations and communication, as a fundamental source of synergies with the overall European effort towards coherent overarching strategy, and therefore also avoiding parallel and unconnected development. This is very important. In the actual text of the regulation of the health data space, EOSC is mentioned only once. And this is also in the interest of the EU member states and the investment at the national and European level to maximize the impact as well as to avoid underspending. So the European health data space should really develop synergistically with the EOSC initiative, exploiting and strengthening the relevant existing public infrastructure and services, and should in general build on and make use of already existing infrastructure and fair data services that are already existing and developing in the different project of EOSC project. In addition to that, the European Health Data Space Board shall cooperate with all the other relevant bodies, entities and experts, including EOSC, of course, in the effort of reaching advanced solutions for the fair data usage in research and innovation. And the health data access bodies shall cooperate with the governance of EOSC to build upon the experience in building a European fair data space and to elaborate with the research effort towards an interoperability solution in the frame of EOSC. It's very important that the implementation of new infrastructure for the secondary use of electronic health data will be done in coherence with the overall IT governance framework of the European Commission, especially building upon the expertise and technical solution developed in the field of research and innovation, and therefore contributing to the strengthening of the EU effort for a coherent fair data policy. The purpose of the EOSC association that I'm representing here today is actually to provide what we say the single voice for the advocacy and representation of the broader EOSC stakeholder community. So the EOSC association represents all of us: research performing organization, service provider organization, research funding organization. And the purpose is to promote the alignment of the European Union research policies and priorities with activities coordinated by the association. There is really the need of coordination. We see there are lots of projects, lots of initiatives, lots of tools and infrastructure, and we need to really to coordinate all these products and tools and initiatives. And also, of course, to enable seamless access to data through interoperable services that address the entire research data life cycle. This is the association today. This picture has been taken during the General Assembly in May. The association have a strong member base with 163 members at the moment and 78 observers, including research performing organizations, service providers organization, and funding bodies. And also, we have a very large EOSC brain pool with over 400 volunteers that contributed to the development of to the work of task forces. Here you see 5 groups, including 13 task forces working for the development of the strategic agenda and the EOSC. And I want to focus only on the task force very briefly. I mean, I will not go into details that are related to data. The task force on metadata and data quality with the FAIR metrics and data quality task force for the implement and of the proposed FAIR metrics for EOSC by assessing their applicability across research communities and testing a range of tools to enable the uptake. The semantic interoperability of task force, this is very important for, for reaching the interoperability. The data stewardship curricula and career path. The long-term data preservation task force, this is also very important to think about long-term preservation of data. And lastly, the technical interoperability of data and services task force. Data interoperability is very important, and interoperability have several layers. The legal interoperability, that is about the copyright, the licensing, the data protection, and the GDPR. And there is the need for an alignment across Europe on this. The organizational interoperability that are related to rules of participation, long-term funding plans for services, responsibility for providing services, the semantic interoperability related to metadata and ontologies, interpretation of meanings and structure, and lastly, the technical interoperability that is related to the framework, authorization and authentication infrastructure providers, PDI, and persistent identifier. Lastly, I want to say that, to my point of view, the division between primary use and secondary use of health data cannot be strictly upheld in practice. The research is at the basis of an efficient healthcare, and in turn, healthcare can offer challenges path to research. So to my point of view, healthcare system should be set up from the start in a compatible way with the needs of research. Health data and digital workflow are at the intersection of primary care and research and need to be conceptualized from the beginning as complementary to reduce errors, avoid duplication of procedures, and allow for innovative digital health solution. And in Italy, we have a pilot project. We have a project on biobanking, the healthcare integrated biobanking, but also we have a pilot project on FAIR by design. This is in Bologna. There are the university, the research hospitals, 3 research hospitals, and several other hospitals, in which actually they collect and access large volumes of data in compliance with legal, organizational, and regulatory requirements. And the input data source undergo an assessment process to establish their origin, permitted uses, presence of valid consent and authorization, and condition for processing. Outcomes of this assessment process are coded into a set of standardized metadata. And this ALMA Health database will support data fairness with dedicated services for data curation, data quality management, analysis of legal requirements, and standardization of data and metadata. This is not so difficult for data collected prospectively, but we are also working for data already collected, so for retrospective work. So this will come later. And with this, I thank you very much, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much, Marialuisa. Questions from the audience? Yeah.
Christian Oman from ECRIN. You talked about cooperation between EHDS and EOSC in the area of research and innovation. How do you want to do that? What is the plan? Is there formal things foreseen, working groups, structures, or is it more an informal process? What is the plan for that?
We need to start a dialogue. Let's say like this. We need to start a dialogue. For sure, on the side of the Commission, at least in the framework of project, the health data space is always mentioned in the previous one and also in the next one, has, very important for when the development, of the project. And I think that the same should be, about vice versa on health data space. So we really need to dialogue. We don't need to, not only to reinvent the wheel, but we already have services that are developed or are developing, and we have infrastructure with expertise for, providing support to the aims of the health data space. So I think that at some point the intersection will happen, hopefully.
Thank you very much. He stole my question, by the way. Klaus.
I mean, it's a lot of really good points to pick up on, Marialuisa. I wanted to pick up on one, which I agree I think is one of the major challenges. In this federated landscape, you talked about people and training about people, but I think one of the major challenges we have is to make sure that we build up capacity and skills in all the national facilities that will have to manage data and manage access to data at a completely different scale. So it's not only the technical skills, but also the sort of organizational and management skills required to work in that large European network. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Indeed. Thank you for the question. This gives me the possibility to introduce a number of projects that are already funded and that are working towards this aim. What really is needed is to provide skills, to empower the new generations, and also to pave the way for the new generations of data managers, data stewards, and also to the clinicians. Actually, we need to be empowered and to learn how to manage data and how to generate already fair by design data during the clinical practice. And we think that this should be done in a coordinated way at the European level. If the training is done in a fractionated way, like is done at the moment, we will go nowhere. If in any project 100,000, 200,000 of euros will be devoted to training, what we can do, organize workshop, trying to, but not really a complete program for training for the actual data managers, actual scientists, but also for the next. So we need really to have at the European level a coordination of these activities. And there are projects like Skill for EOSC or Writing Plus.
Thank you very much. There is any other question, Sandra?
Thank you very much, Marialuisa, for your presentation. I only have a question. It's kind of, I would really like to have some insight on the thoughts from within the association regarding EOS Health, which, might be a specificity within it. I think the reasons behind this specificity has been argued elsewhere and broadly, but it's still unclear to me, what are the thoughts from within the association? Because I think you're right. You claim that representing researchers and the broad set of researchers in health is definitely an aim, but I wonder to what extent that's a reality in the current status. So if you could shed some light on the thoughts on how you intend to achieve that and to actually have an EOS Health. Thank you so much.
As you know, the association is still, I cannot say a newborn, but still an infant, right? So we started to work launching a number of task forces on, general issues. But we are well aware that there are specific domains where we have to focus more. And one of the first initiatives that we have, and starting this initiative, is to work with and to launch a working group with research infrastructure of any domain, including health, and start discussing with the infrastructure what to do together to better implement and exploit the services for EOSC. And for sure, I mean, in the next future, very soon, we also will focus more on specific domains.
Thank you very much. Sandra, I don't know if you want to follow up the question. Okay. Very last question. You were advocating for clarity in the regulation, right? That we have regulation, should be clarity how we operate in that framework. But you also were advocating about this artificial division of primary use of data and secondary use of data. To me, and I would like to know your thoughts, primary use of data has their own regulation. So removing that barrier maybe will complicate the whole context rather than simplifying it. What do you think?
I'm not talking about removing barriers. What I want to say is that the data from the health system, I mean, the data generated from the health system should really be kind of organized, generated already according to the FAIR principles in a way that they can be immediately useful for research, right? Because to make data fair ex post cost money, cost a lot of effort, and therefore, I mean, there is really the need to think about fair by design collection of data, also in the clinical practice. And this requires a change of culture and some tools and infrastructure.
And probably some money as well.
And some money, of course. And some money.
Okay.
There are, I'm sorry. YouTube live streaming is not working. Huh?
Okay. We have switched to Microsoft Teams.
As the EOSC Association currently involved the health-related communities, public health institutes, healthy experts, is there room for improvement, the involvement? Yes, we encourage the involvement of and to enlarge our community, and we are lucky enough to have several infrastructure, and in the infrastructure, and there are experts on ELSI, on legal experts, and also ELSI ethical experts that are part of our task forces and are helping in shaping this our work.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Marialuisa. So and then we move to our next speaker. So Roselien, let me see whether I can pronounce properly. So Roselien Pas. So you're she works as a data protection manager at the Belgian Cancer Registry. So welcome, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I want to make sure that everyone knows that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not an expert in GDPR and in all of those laws. The first speaker was, if I'm correct. So for all those questions, you can go to him. I work closely together with our DPO, so I'm also not a DPO officer, so a data protection officer. I have an experience in data, like in science. I did a PhD, and I'm now working for the Belgian Cancer Registry. And I will talk on sensitive data sharing for research, specific for our organization, and the challenges we have as a data holder. So who are we? What do we do? We are actually a foundation of public utility. We collect all data on new cancer diagnoses and their follow-up. And we actually set up a Belgian cancer database in order to report on incidence, prevalence, and survival of different cancer types, to evaluate cancer screening programs that are currently running in Belgium, to evaluate cancer treatment. And also a big task we do is to perform just certain studies on cancer. And a lot of those studies are really performed by our internal research department, but we also want to make it possible for external researchers to use the data we collect. And so this is where the data sharing pops up and all the questions around it. For us, the legislation we have to keep in mind are the General Data Protection Regulation, the specific law that mentions our organization, the things we can do, the data we can collect, the transfers we can make to perform our legal tasks. And then last but not least, we also have to look at a law of December 13th. It was set up in 2006, and it's about actually the establishing the Information Security Committee. I'm so sorry. So this is an organization in Belgium. It's very specific. I don't know who already heard of them. But the most important thing they do, if you want to link certain sensitive data, health data, social, about certain social topics, social economical status, you have to ask authorization in Belgium to do that. And so that's the organization that can provide you with an authorization. We see in our organization two different types of data sharing, or two different options. And I will try to make this as practical as possible. So imagine a certain researcher comes to our organization and asks, or like wants to perform a real life study on the epidemiology and choice of treatment for patients with follicular non-Hodgkin lymphoma in Belgium. That student or that researcher needs actually data that is available at our organization. They don't need additional data linkage with experimental data that is being collected. They don't need additional data from another data holder, just from our organization. In that case, we see the best option to give this researcher access on our remote environment. It's a secured environment. We can talk about, like, we are providing a VPN access, they can access the data. All the things that we have to accomplish to make this possible. Step one, make sure there is a research agreement. This research agreement can be seen as actually a transfer agreement in line of the GDPR. We have certain aspects that are part of that agreement. We make sure that there is a purpose limitation. The researcher cannot use the data that are made available on our remote environment for different projects, just for this project. There is an overview of all the variables that are being requested. We make sure that there are not variables being requested that are not needed to answer the research question. We ask specifically not to try to re-identify the data subjects that are involved in the database. We make sure that the researcher is not sharing the data with other partners or other parties. The researcher needs to sign a confidentiality agreement, and they can only publish sufficiently aggregated data. And they can only publish those data after we've seen the certain analysis, and if we think that they are sufficiently aggregated. Step two, we provide the researcher with a privacy awareness training, and actually also a meeting afterwards to make sure that they know what they can do, what they can't do on our remote environment. Step three is actually providing the VPN access and everything that comes with that. And actually after step three, the researcher is having access to their data. The challenges we have with this option, it's very time consuming. So the process from the beginning until the actual data access, it takes a long time. The procedure is very long. We need to make sure that there is a training, that the researcher can follow the training. They are very busy because often they are also doctors. They are having a very busy schedule. We need to provide guidance with adherence to the procedure. We need to make sure that actually everything we ask for is very good followed, because we're a data controller in this view, and we need to make sure that all the data protection rules are followed. And we need to follow up on the agreement. And so it's actually very obvious that all of this leads into very high costs for us in human resources. Costs that are hard, I mean, funding that is often hard to find. So yeah. Then there is an option 2. A researcher comes to our organization and wants to perform a study to investigate the association between early in-life exposures to ionizing radiation and risk of cancer. Very nice research question. In this case, the researcher has its own experimental data, wants to use also health insurance data, and wants to use our data. So 3 different data holders. And more specifically, the researcher wants to perform the data analysis on their own data warehouse because they want to actually also have data from other European countries. They want to bring the data together, and then they want to research everything together. So it's not an option to provide the data or provide access to our secured environment. The data has to be transferred. And this is actually our second option, the data transfer. What needs to be done if you want to really transfer the data? First of all, there is the organization that I talked about. There's the Information Security Committee, and they need to give, or they need to provide, an approval. To get such approval, you need to submit an approval form with a lot of information, data protection info of all the data holders or providers involved, contact info, information about their DPO, whether there is a supervising physician available or not. All of those organizations, their lawful basis for the data processing, the applicable legislation, technical and organizational measures, and so on. So a lot of information from all the different data holders. They want also a very specific list of all the data variables that are being requested to link with each other. They want to have a description of those variables. What do they mean? They want also a reason why those variables are being requested. They want to see a data flow. Where is the data starting? Where is it going to? Where is the endpoint of the data? They want to make sure that there is a trusted third party involved that is able to link the data to code the data, actually. So we are having non-pseudonymized data, but in the end, the researcher will be working with pseudonymized data. And so there is this independent organization called a trusted third party here in Belgium that is actually linking those data, coding them, and so on. And then they also asked to perform a theoretical small cell risk analysis. I don't know whether all of you already heard of it. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that in the discussion. And then last but not least, they also ask to perform data protection impact assessment and to make sure that that there are certain agreements between the data holders involved. Step 2 is a data transfer agreement, because we are sending our data to another organization, we are sending them out. We want to make sure that there is a data transfer agreement in place for doing that. And that data transfer agreement is actually, I'm not going to go through them again, it's actually having a lot of aspects that I already talked about in the research agreement. It's quite similar, a lot of things come back there. And then we have Step 3, it's actually preparing the data, making sure that the right data are being selected and actually transferring them. The challenges that are involved here is, first of all, it's again very time consuming. You need to make sure that this application form is being submitted at the Information Security Committee. The approval form is actually only existing in Dutch or French. So international researchers are having like a lot of problems submitting this form because it's not existing in English. The organization is having a very strict approach on the GDPR, so that's also a challenge. After you actually submit your form, there are often a lot of changes asked to be made, so it's a long process for until approval. And we actually don't know whether what their standpoint is today when it comes to international studies that are being performed. This was it. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Questions from the audience? Yep, there is one in the back.
Thank you for the presentation. I have rather a legalistic question. So when you establish all these agreements, are you establishing them with a researcher as a natural person? Because I assume that they don't represent, okay, with their organization.
Always with an institution.
Okay.
Yeah. Never with a personal, because it's impossible for that person to really stand in for if things go wrong, etc.
So absolutely.
Always the institution. But that's also where there is a big hassle because researchers often change affiliations. So they start their project, then the project is running. It takes sometimes up to 4 years until the project is actually done. They change affiliations, but then you're having this issue because the agreement is being established with the first affiliation, but the research is actually still going on while they already changed affiliations. So it's hard.
Okay. So in terms of responsibility, role and responsibility, I assume the researchers organization will act as a data processor, right? Or data controller.
Data control. We see it actually as when we transfer our data, we see it actually as a transfer between two data controllers.
Okay. Yeah. But we don't share the responsibility, right? So it's not a joint controllership.
No.
Okay. And the next,
but again, I must say, like, I think this is also maybe one of the challenges. It's like we do the best as we can because we want to make it possible to share our data.
Absolutely.
We see it as our duty actually as an organization holding so much important data. But I mean, this might not be the correct way to proceed. So it would be nice to have some guidance.
It's a matter of also of taking the risk, right? So what level of risk your organization wants to
is willing to take.
Yeah, exactly. And the last question would be: do you request a insurance coverage? And what type do you? Is it a professional insurance coverage? Is it a specific cyber?
You have specific insurances that are like taking the data protection aspect also in there. A lot. I'm not an insurance expert, but I know that they exist. So it's something definitely to look into.
Okay, but is it required by agreement or?
No, it's not. It's not required.
Okay,
so far.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, there is another question.
Hello, Irene from Cinsano. Thank you very much for presenting nicely the challenges of the researchers. Now I wanted to ask you, what solution do you think could fasten up this process and improve it? Do you see these solutions at the moment in the legislation for the European health data space? And what are the services that they're still missing?
Well, I think it's quite hard. So the GDPR was there to make sure that data sharing would be easier amongst countries between the EU. But because there are still a lot of like national legislations that are still there, it's quite hard. So I think we need to go towards a real like common view on the regulation on how we interpret GDPR. And I think that would be a solution somewhere, make sure that we're talking about the same things. Is that an answer to your question?
Yeah, I see Nicholas there.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. Now, it struck me, we often make catalogs and discuss in these European projects about the challenges, but I don't think I've ever seen a catalog of organizations that do this in practice and list potential solutions. And I think that sort of playbook of things that are already working would be very, very useful. So that might be something to pick up in the context of HealthyCloud.
Thank you. No, that is great. Actually, in line with what Nicholas was saying, imagine for a second that you can scale up the process. Which services will be essential to you to do it? So, because human resources were a limiting factor, so what would you need?
I think for us, as a cancer registry, so amongst Europe, there are a lot of different cancer registries, like every country has their own. I think it would be very nice to talk together about this issue, to have like a certain working group, to see how they are working around this topic, to maybe like find a common ground. I think that would be very helpful right now for us. But then there is also it's also important to be able to link data related to cancer to other data. So then there is this other issue. So we cannot just restrict ourselves through like the cancer registries, but we need to go beyond and further. But I think bringing together organizations is a very good start.
Okay, so that will be like a community of practice to bring different cancer registries. And then in my mind, when you're saying the possibility to link different data types resemble FAIR data, because if you have this interoperability aspect, then you can start looking for ways to interoperate and then to go beyond the cancer registry data. Okay. So we will invite you actually to the year for cancer that has been mentioned in the question that we have here in the screen, that because of time, we are not going to go into that, just to elaborate a little bit further. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you to all the speakers on this session. Oh, sorry, Marialuisa.
No. I mean, I just wanted to point out that it's very important for cancer registries also to have links with other type of data, like environmental data
Sure.
and socioeconomic data. And also what is very, very important is the interoperability between cancer registries. I mean, to have semantic interoperability, which is not true in Europe, at least not for all the cancer registries. So, and we need to work together on this.
Exactly. So worth taking to both of you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers.